The purpose of this video is to show how to replace the personality module, the configuration chip, in a 10-player console box. And the tools you're going to need are a Phillips head screwdriver. What we have found to be very effective is even a standard pocket knife is a really good way to remove the device, and the replacement chip, which was sent to you in the mail. First thing we have to do is we have to remove the two screws that hold the top and bottom together, and just unscrew them. And when we drop those screws out, we'll set these off to the side here. Now, the chip that needs to be installed is actually, it's underneath this portion of the box right here, underneath the green light and the reset button. And what we need, there's a lot of wires that connect the top to the top of the box to the bottom of the box, so we have to be very careful when we do this, and that's really the reason why this video is important. So what we have to do is we have to carefully pry the top of the box like this, and then the panel that has the power connector right here, the panel connector, let's go ahead and take that panel out and pull it to the side. Now as I've opened it up, you can see the circuit board, and right here, this device right here, this is the device we're going to change. Now this is a little tricky because, as you can see, there's a rat's nest of wires here that connect all the lights to the top of this box. Now we're going to go ahead and move this out of the way to give ourselves some room. Now here's the tricky part. This is the most critical part, and this is the part that, well, this is one of the most critical parts. We're going to remove the chip that's already in there. Now when you look down in here at this chip, you can see, let me move this panel out of the way. Yeah, you can see that the chip, see, this is what a chip looks like. You can see that the chip body is sitting on top of a plastic socket. I'll show it to you right here, I'll point to it. There's the chip body right here. Oops. There we go. There's the chip body right here. And then there, down here at the bottom is this plastic socket. Obviously the plastic socket stays on the board, and what we're going to do is we're going to drive the knife or some kind of a sharp edge between the chip and the socket. What I'm going to do is I'm going to carefully work the chip. I'm going to start to insert it between the two. You see how the knife blade, let me see if I can get a better view of that. See how the knife blade is making its way underneath. Now notice how I'm driving the knife in, and what that's doing is that's lifting. Think about lifting all of these pins slowly out of that socket. So I push the knife blade in like that. Now the nice thing about a knife blade is that it's beveled. Now the way I do this for a field repair is I rotate the knife blade so that the bevel is on the opposite side, and I push the knife in again so that this way I've loosened the pins on both sides uniformly. Now that they're loosened, I will carefully twist the knife blade on one side, and now I'll rotate my knife. I'll reinsert it into under the chip. I'll carefully rotate it, and then I lift the chip out. Okay, this is the chip that's not going to be used, and I'll set it to the side. Now this is the new chip. This is the replacement chip that was sent. Now with this replacement chip, what we're going to do is, now this is where it becomes very critical. There is a right way and there's a wrong way to install this chip. Now if you look at the surface of the chip, if you look at it so that the writing on top of the chip is so that you can read it, on the left is a what I call a divot, or a little round spot down here at the bottom, and there's a little divot up here in the center. Those do not appear on the opposite side. The key thing is to look at the printing on the chip and to see these things to the left. Okay. This corner with the divot has to be positioned so that it is toward what I call the outside of the board. It's toward the closest back of the board. And in fact, the socket even has a little divot on it too, to help remind you that that's where that side of the chip goes. Now here's how we do this. There are 40 pins on this chip, and we have to make sure that all 40 pins get into the socket. Once all the pins are pointing straight into the socket and started into the socket, then we apply uniform pressure and seat the chip gently into the socket, and then we'll know that the chip is properly installed. Now the first thing we're going to do, like I mentioned, we're going to make sure that we can find that little divot mark, and here's the little divot on my chip. So now I'm going to go ahead and what I do is I start by putting all the pins of one side. I'm going to put them right against here like this. So I start it like that. Okay, and I can kind of feel that it's there, and I look to make sure that the both ends, so that the chip is centered on the socket, so no pins are overhanging. And now I start to close the chip. I close the door like this. See how I'm lowering the chip into the socket, and I'm pushing with my thumb just a little bit so that the pins are I'm sure, and as I press in, I can feel the pin starting to contact. And now that it's contacted, I give it a gentle push. And then on the other side, to give it, and I push it on the middle very gently. You can hear the click. I'm going to press it just a little bit more. Now, I can be sure that it's in. Now, to know for sure, I'm going to turn it on its edge. And now you can see right down that line, the chip itself is square with the socket. And that chip is properly installed. Now before I apply power, I'm going to check two things. I'm going to double check to make absolutely sure that the divot is right here, which is where it's supposed to be, which is toward the edge of the board. And then I'm going to look down. I'm going to look down on the chip to make sure the chip is centered on the socket, to make sure that there aren't any pins hanging over this edge or hanging over this back edge. And I also will do a visual inspection. I'll do a visual inspection on all these pins to make sure that none of the pins got bent or are not connected into the socket. Now to reinstall the lid, move the lid back around, and then I carefully slide the panel down in here, the power panel down in here, and now I line up the slots in the lid with the panels put on both sides, just like this. And then see, it's important not to do this right here. It's important to make sure that the panel is into the proper guide, and then when I can squeeze the box shut, there we go. Now when I can squeeze the box shut and I can close both sides like I've got here, then it's time to put the screws back together and just apply a modest amount of pressure on the screws. Then the 10 players configuration has been updated.